At midnight, the lobby of a downtown hotel buzzed with the remnants of a late-night gala. The space was a study in contrasts. Polished marble floors reflected the bright neon of lobby screens and the quiet murmur of shifting conversations, while the expensive furnishings and contemporary artwork whispered of luxury and sophistication. Guests, many still dressed in elegant attire, milled about, sharing subdued laughter and recalling moments from the evening. Amid this orchestrated calm, a series of events was unfolding that would soon expose a hidden betrayal beneath the hotel's gleaming exterior. Jared Collins, a maintenance technician with decades of experience in the building, was making his final rounds. Known for his keen eye and silent diligence, he moved through the corridors and stairwells with practiced efficiency. On this particular night, as he approached a secured hallway leading to staff offices, something unusual caught his attention. A door that should have been firmly locked was left ajar. Jared hesitated at the threshold, his gut pricking with apprehension. Reluctantly, he pushed the door open, his flashlight beam revealing a small office cluttered with boxes, file cabinets, and outdated computer equipment. And there, lying motionless on the polished floor, was the body of a man. The victim, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that now hung in disarray, lay crumpled in an unnatural heap. His eyes were fixed in a frozen expression of shock, and his hand, still extended, clutched a scrap of paper. The paper, its ink smeared into an indecipherable array of numbers and letters, suggested a frantic attempt to leave behind a clue. Jared's heart pounded as he stepped back and fumbled for his radio. In a trembling voice he reported, "There's been an incident in the staff office." Within minutes, his call had drawn the attention of uniformed officers and forensic specialists who soon arrived, their movements precise and deliberate as they cordoned off the area. In the hushed stillness of the narrow office, forensic experts methodically documented every detail. They photographed the victim's position on the spotless floor, the faint impressions of his designer shoes left in a thin layer of condensation, and every nuance of the scrap of paper still clutched in his lifeless hand. The arrangement of evidence was as meticulous as it was chilling, a calculated scene that left little doubt this was no random act, but a deliberate execution meant to obscure a secret. Authorities later identified the victim as Leon Barrett, a mid-level manager in charge of overseeing the hotel's daily operations and financial reconciliations. Colleagues described Leon as an impeccably organized professional, whose attention to detail was legendary. He maintained records with a dedication that earned him the respect of staff and management alike. In recent weeks, however, Leon had become increasingly preoccupied. In private conversations, some had observed him poring over discrepancies in the hotel's donation records and internal expense reports, minor irregularities that, when aggregated, hinted at something more nefarious than simple human error. On several occasions, he had mentioned that the numbers just didn't add up, a statement that he had dismissed as a routine anomaly at the time. Now his silent, tragic form spoke volumes of a man who had paid the ultimate price for pursuing a truth that others wished to conceal. Detective Simone Harris was assigned to the case. With a reputation built on an ability to uncover hidden details and challenge official narratives, Simone entered the hotel with quiet determination. Rather than rushing to impose her own timeline, she spent time absorbing the scene, the gentle hum of electronic displays in the lobby, the smooth echo of footsteps on marble, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with disinfectant. In the cramped office where Leon's body had been discovered, Simone knelt and carefully removed the scrap of paper from his stiff hand. Its edges were torn, the ink blurred as if written in a moment of desperation. Simone's eyes narrowed as she recorded every detail in her worn notebook, every scuffed imprint on the floor, every stray fiber on the paper, aware that even the smallest clue might unlock the mystery behind this cold, calculated act. Rather than immediately stitching together a linear account of the night's events, Simone allowed her investigation to expand in layers, gathering testimonies and piecing together the fragments of a larger picture. Her first step was to talk with staff who had been present during the hours preceding the discovery. In a quiet corner near the reception area, she met with Talia Rivera, a front desk clerk whose calm manner often belied a sharp intuition. Talia recalled that earlier in the evening, as the hotel was still buzzing with post-event excitement, she had seen Leon in deep conversation with a vendor near the loading dock. "He seemed really worried," Talia said in a hushed tone, glancing around as if fearful of being overheard. He mentioned something about discrepancies in the invoices and that the numbers weren't matching the delivery notes. I thought he was just stressed about the event, but now I suspect he might have discovered something far more serious. Talia's soft-spoken recollection hinted at a secret investigation that had consumed Leon's final days. Next, Simone interviewed Jerome Fields, a security guard with a long tenure at the hotel who had a reputation for remembering the smallest details. Jerome recalled that just before closing, he had seen Leon pacing in a hallway near the staff break room, his expression intense and troubled. I noticed he was checking his phone repeatedly and scribbling notes on a pad, Jerome recounted, his voice low. He said something about figures not adding up in the financial reports. At first, I thought it was just a routine concern, but now it seems he was following a trail that someone didn't want to be discovered. Jerome's testimony further solidified the possibility that Leon's inquiries had threatened to expose a hidden network of corruption. Haunted by these fragments of conversation, Detective Harris obtained a warrant to search Leon Barrett's modest apartment, located in a nondescript building just a few blocks from the hotel. The apartment was unpretentious, a single room with a functional layout that included a small sofa, a cluttered desk stacked with papers, and a narrow window overlooking a busy street. The space carried a faint smell of stale coffee and old paper, echoing the quiet life of a man dedicated to precision. In a locked drawer of an old wooden desk, Simone discovered Leon's personal journal, a well-worn leather-bound notebook that recorded his daily observations in neat, deliberate handwriting. The early entries detailed routine tasks, opening and closing times, inventory counts, and brief notes on staff performance. Yet as the entries progressed, his tone shifted. In one entry dated just 3 days before his death, he wrote, "There are recurring discrepancies in the donation records and expense reports, small amounts missing from every transaction that, when totaled, form a significant deficit. I fear that someone with access is deliberately altering these numbers for personal gain. If I continue to follow this, I may expose a secret that powerful individuals will do anything to protect." The entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been yanked away mid-sentence, leaving behind a silence that was as ominous as it was unanswered. Simultaneously, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Leon's aging cell phone, a device marked by a cracked screen and worn keys that testified to many late nights of work. The recovered messages were brief and unadorned. One read, "Stop now," and another simply stated, "Don't ask questions." Their stark, direct tone confirmed what Detective Harris had long suspected. Someone had been issuing clear warnings to Leon, and those warnings had come too late. Rather than impose a neat sequence of events, Simone allowed her investigation to branch out like the nodes of a complex network. With cooperation from the hotel's management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in a secure archive on the top floor of the building, a room filled with decades of data, old ledgers, and digital logs that chronicled the institution's financial transactions. Working alongside veteran records clerk Elijah Brooks, whose decades of service had given him an almost instinctive understanding of the numbers, Simone meticulously compared the digital records with the original handwritten ledgers. The differences were subtle. A single digit altered here, a date misprinted there, but when these minor discrepancies were compiled over several months, they revealed a pattern that was far too systematic to be a mere error. The digital records consistently indicated that every shipment and donation was recorded as complete, while the handwritten ledgers repeatedly showed small shortfalls, tiny amounts missing from each entry that, when aggregated, amounted to a significant diversion of funds. Forensic accountants were brought in to scrutinize the data. Their painstaking analysis produced detailed charts and graphs that mapped the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. The numbers were damning. These minor shortfalls, seemingly trivial on a day-to-day basis, had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been covertly transferred through a complex network of electronic transactions to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Every fractional variance contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based systems for personal enrichment. As layers of evidence continued to build, Detective Harris began receiving anonymous tips. One plain envelope, discovered tucked behind a row of filing cabinets in the archive room, contained a typed note that read, "Every figure conceals a truth." Another tip, delivered via a secure email from an untraceable account, bluntly instructed, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages provided few specifics, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those responsible were watching her every move and were prepared to act if their secret was threatened. Federal agents, alerted by the mounting evidence and the potential breadth of the corruption, soon joined the investigation armed with advanced digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a near-complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Leon's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown increasingly urgent in the final days before his death. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the hotel's budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Leon's inquiry threatened to expose the truth, his life was callously ended. Detective Harris compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a sprawling dossier of over 400 pages interwoven with photographs of the quiet archive room, scans of pages from Leon's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds to their offshore destination. The dossier presented a coherent narrative. Subtle discrepancies in the hotel's donation and expense records had been deliberately engineered over time to divert funds into an offshore account. When Leon began to document these irregularities, his investigation threatened to expose a deeply entrenched network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to protect its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, troubled by the implications of the evidence for public trust in the community's institutions, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse known for its rigorous pursuit of accountability. Over a series of lengthy sessions that stretched late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic methods used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that demonstrated the improbability of the discrepancies being accidental, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with clear technical precision, left little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Leon Barrett. The trial itself unfolded over several weeks in a bustling courtroom filled with hotel staff, local residents, legal experts, and an eager press. Federal prosecutors presented their case with unyielding clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant sum of money from the hotel's operating budget. A digital forensics expert took the stand and painstakingly explained how each terse command, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew ever more urgent as the investigation progressed. Forensic accountants unveiled elaborate graphs that demonstrated how the cumulative effect of small, seemingly insignificant errors resulted in a financial gap that could only be the product of deliberate, systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a slow, nearly invisible process that allowed corruption to infiltrate a system once considered infallible. When Detective Harris finally took the stand, her voice was calm yet resonant with the weight of personal loss. She recounted with measured clarity the moment she discovered Leon's body in the silent archive room, the smooth, cold surface of the floor, the faint imprint of his shoes in a thin film of dust, and the delicate scrap of paper that had been his final, desperate clue. Her testimony stitched together every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and terse text messages, forming a portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption that left the courtroom in a profound, reflective silence. In the end, the grand jury's indictments led to the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded as stark warnings against the abuse of institutional trust. Yet many in the community felt that true accountability remained elusive. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects behind the diversion, managed to shield themselves through complex legal defenses, and their identities remained largely hidden. This lingering uncertainty served as a sobering reminder that even when corruption is exposed, some secrets persist in the hidden corridors of power. Following the trial, the hotel's management was forced to confront a new era of accountability. Under relentless scrutiny from independent auditors and an engaged public, sweeping reforms were implemented to overhaul the digital record-keeping systems. New protocols mandated real-time logging of every donation, every expense, and every administrative decision, fortified by robust encryption and subject to regular public audits. Although these measures could not restore the life lost, they stood as a firm commitment to transparency, a promise that no hidden discrepancy would again compromise the integrity of the institution. Local media outlets, driven by a dedication to investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and comprehensive articles detailing every aspect of the case, from the unexpected discovery in the hidden archive room to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a covert network of corruption. Community forums and town hall meetings emerged at local civic centers, where residents, business leaders, and legal scholars engaged in lively debates about the ethical responsibilities of digital data management and the preservation of public trust. The story of Leon Barrett, a dedicated manager whose pursuit of truth cost him his life, became a rallying cry for accountability, galvanizing renewed efforts among community members to scrutinize every record and challenge every hidden anomaly. For Detective Harris, each new investigation was approached with the hard-earned lessons of this case firmly in mind. In the quiet hours before the hotel reopened each day, in her modest workspace illuminated by a single desk lamp and the soft hum of her computer, she would often reread the pages of Leon's journal and examine the reconstructed text messages with unwavering focus. Every minute detail, a small variance in a ledger, a curt directive from a deleted message, served as a constant reminder that diligent inquiry is essential to unveiling corruption, and that even the smallest inconsistency can open a door to exposing vast networks of deceit. As the hotel gradually resumed its operations, guests checking into luxurious rooms, staff bustling with renewed efficiency, and the familiar sound of lively conversation echoing through the halls, the legacy of the investigation transformed not only the internal processes of the establishment, but also the broader community's commitment to transparency. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as models of accountability, routinely audited by independent experts and accessible to any concerned citizen. Ongoing dialogues about ethical data management and the preservation of institutional integrity became regular topics at local business workshops and cultural centers, ensuring that the hard lessons learned from Leon Barrett's untimely death would inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, pieced together from digital clues, meticulous financial analyses, and the unwavering determination of an investigator who refused to let even the smallest detail go unnoticed, went far beyond the narrative of a single murder. It exposed an intricate web of modern corruption, a tapestry woven from hidden errors and deliberate omissions that demonstrated how even a trusted institution could be undermined from within. The reforms that followed, the increased awareness among staff, and the community's collective resolve to question every record became a lasting testament to the power of truth. And as the automatic doors of the downtown hotel opened each day to welcome a new wave of guests seeking comfort and luxury, the memory of Leon Barrett endured, a quiet challenge to examine every irregularity and uphold accountability as the foundation of a just society. A narrow concrete corridor led to the back of the bustling port warehouse, where the steady drone of forklifts and the rhythmic clatter of cargo containers marked the relentless pace of international trade. In this sprawling complex of shipping docks and rusted machinery, operations ran like clockwork day in and day out, ensuring that goods from across the globe moved smoothly through the labyrinth of storage and distribution. Yet hidden among the routine was a secret that would soon shatter the illusion of order. Logistics supervisor Adrian Morales had long prided himself on his unwavering attention to detail. For years, he had managed the warehouse's extensive inventory, meticulously logging every shipment and every item that passed through the facility. His work, both on paper and in the digital system, was known for its precision. Recently, however, Adrian had begun to notice subtle inconsistencies, small differences between the numbers on the electronic manifests and the handwritten logs that sat in a locked cabinet behind the main office. At first he dismissed these as minor errors, the kind that might occur on busy days when the volume of shipments was high. But as the discrepancies grew more consistent, Adrian's unease transformed into a quiet obsession. Late one evening, after the last of the trucks had pulled away and the warehouse settled into its post-shift silence, he stayed behind to cross-check the records. He compared digital entries against the original paper logs, noting that certain shipments appeared to be missing small quantities of high-value items. The differences were almost imperceptible, a fraction of a unit here, a slight undercount there, but over time they began to form a pattern that no one could ignore. Adrian jotted down his findings in a worn leather notebook, his handwriting becoming more hurried and tense with each passing day. In his final entry, penned 3 days before the incident, he wrote, "The numbers aren't adding up. There's a systematic shortfall in the inventory that can't be chalked up to mere error. I fear that someone with access is diverting goods for profit. I must be careful. If I dig too deep, I might expose a secret that some will kill to keep hidden." That entry ended abruptly, the sentence left unfinished, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-thought. On a routine night shift, while the warehouse was nearly empty and the hum of machinery was the only sound breaking the silence, Adrian returned to the office for a final check. As he passed through a narrow corridor, flanked by rows of metal lockers, his gaze fell upon an office door that he distinctly remembered locking after closing. It was slightly ajar, an anomaly in a place where strict security protocols were the norm. Puzzled and alarmed, Adrian pushed the door open with a gentle tug and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single overhead lamp, its light flickering intermittently. Stacks of neatly organized documents, old shipping records, and maintenance logs lined the walls. In the center of the room, sprawled on the cold concrete floor, lay the body of a man. The victim was dressed in a pressed uniform that now lay in disarray. His tailored jacket was splattered with dark stains, and his face, frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror, was turned upward as if caught in a final, futile plea. Clutched in his right hand was a scrap of paper, its edges crumpled and ink blurred into a chaotic mess of numbers and letters that provided no immediate explanation. Adrian's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back, barely able to process what he was witnessing. Moments later, his panicked call over the radio summoned the arrival of security personnel and forensic teams. Within minutes, the room was cordoned off, and uniformed officers in dark uniforms moved in with deliberate precision. Forensic specialists began to document every detail, the exact position of the body, the faint imprint left by the victim's shoes on the polished floor, and the tiny scrap of paper still clutched in his stiff fingers. Every step was measured, as if the scene had been designed to communicate something as well as conceal a crime. Investigators would later identify the victim as Gerald Monroe, a mid-level operations coordinator responsible for overseeing daily shipments and managing the warehouse's financial records. Colleagues remembered Gerald as methodical and discreet, a man whose reputation for accuracy had been the backbone of the facility's efficiency. Yet in recent weeks, some had noticed that Gerald had grown increasingly troubled by the small discrepancies in the inventory. His demeanor had shifted from quiet confidence to anxious determination as he quietly documented each irregularity in his personal log. No one could have predicted that his diligent pursuit of the truth would lead him into the crosshairs of those who preferred the corruption to remain hidden. Detective Simone Archer, known for her unorthodox investigative methods and her ability to notice details that others overlooked, was assigned to the case. Arriving at the warehouse under the glare of industrial lights and the steady hum of machinery, Simone walked slowly through the deserted corridors. Rather than immediately pushing for a timeline, she took time to observe the environment, the stark contrast of clean, modern control panels against the peeling paint of old storage rooms, the echo of her own footsteps on the concrete floor, and the pervasive scent of grease and metal that filled the air. In the administrative room where Gerald's body had been found, Simone knelt with careful deliberation and removed the scrap of paper from his grasp. The paper's hastily written characters were nearly indecipherable, but she sensed that it was a final clue, a desperate attempt to warn someone or expose the truth. She recorded every nuance in her notebook, the way the paper curled at the edges, the faint impressions left by Gerald's hands, and even the pattern of light that had fallen on his face. Instead of imposing a rigid, linear narrative on the unfolding investigation, Detective Archer allowed the case to develop organically. Her first course of action was to gather testimonies from those who had been present in the warehouse in the days leading up to the incident. In a small break room adjacent to the main storage area, she interviewed Marisol Vega, a veteran accountant for the facility whose calm, measured voice belied a deep understanding of the financial workings of the warehouse. Marisol recalled that Gerald had been increasingly preoccupied with discrepancies in the shipping logs and donation records. He was always so precise, always double-checking every entry, Marisol said, her eyes reflecting concern. But recently he mentioned that something wasn't adding up, small figures that when combined created a gap in the records. I assumed it was just stress over the workload, but now I worry he was onto something much more sinister. Marisol's measured recollection suggested that Gerald's investigation had indeed uncovered deliberate manipulation. Next, Simone spoke with Trevor Mills, a forklift operator who had been working the night shift. Trevor remembered that a few nights before the discovery, he had seen Gerald in the narrow corridors near the back office, looking over a set of documents with a furrowed brow. He was checking his phone and muttering about numbers not matching. Trevor recalled in a quiet tone. I asked if everything was all right, and he just shrugged it off and said it was nothing. But in hindsight, it seemed like he was chasing down a lead that could get him into trouble. Trevor's account reinforced the idea that Gerald's meticulous tracking of inventory had put him at odds with someone determined to keep the discrepancies under wraps. Haunted by these testimonies, Detective Archer obtained a warrant to search Gerald Monroe's modest apartment, located in a utilitarian building a few blocks from the warehouse. The apartment was unadorned, a single room furnished with a functional bed, a small desk cluttered with paperwork, and a narrow window that overlooked a busy city street. The interior bore the unmistakable scent of stale coffee and old files, a private archive reflecting a life devoted to detail. In a locked drawer of a scuffed wooden desk, Simone discovered Gerald's personal journal, a leather-bound notebook whose pages were filled with precise, careful entries. The early pages detailed his daily routines and routine checks, but as the entries progressed, a growing sense of unease emerged. In one entry written 3 days before his death, Gerald wrote, "There are consistent discrepancies in our shipment records, tiny amounts missing from every delivery that when aggregated become significant. I fear that someone with privileged access is deliberately siphoning off our resources. If I continue to investigate, I may expose a secret that those in power would kill to keep hidden." The entry ended abruptly, leaving a void of unfinished thought that spoke of imminent danger. Simultaneously, the cyber unit recovered fragments of deleted text messages from Gerald's aging cell phone, a device with a cracked screen and keys worn smooth by years of use. The recovered messages were brief and unadorned. One message simply stated, "Stop now," while another warned, "Don't ask questions." Their cold, directive tone left no room for ambiguity. These were warnings from an unknown source, and they had clearly come too late. Instead of forcing the evidence into a conventional timeline, Detective Archer let the investigation branch out organically, piecing together fragments from various sources. With the cooperation of the warehouse management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in a cramped back office. The room was a repository of decades of transactional data, stacks of handwritten ledgers alongside digital files displayed on aging monitors. Working with Harold Simmons, a seasoned clerk who had maintained these records for over 30 years, Simone meticulously compared the digital logs with the handwritten records. The discrepancies were minute, a single digit altered here, a date shifted there, but when compiled over several months they revealed a pattern that was too consistent to be accidental. The digital records uniformly showed that every shipment was accounted for, while the handwritten logs consistently recorded small shortfalls, fractions missing from each record that, when summed, amounted to a significant diversion of funds and goods. Forensic accountants were then enlisted to analyze the financial data. Their exhaustive work produced detailed charts and graphs that illustrated the cumulative effect of these discrepancies. The numbers were damning. Minor shortfalls, almost invisible in the daily flow, had, over time, resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been covertly transferred through a labyrinth of electronic transactions to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Each fractional variance contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate, systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited the vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based systems for their own enrichment. As layers of evidence accumulated, Detective Archer began receiving anonymous tips. In one instance, a plain envelope was discovered tucked away behind a stack of old files in the back office. The typed note inside read, "Every figure conceals a secret." In another instance, a secure email arrived from an untraceable address with a curt message, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages provided scant details, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those behind the cover-up were closely monitoring her progress and were prepared to act if their secret was threatened. Federal agents, alerted to the potential scope of the corruption, soon joined the investigation using advanced digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a near-complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Gerald's phone, revealing that the warnings had intensified in the final days before his murder. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the warehouse's budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Gerald's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was callously extinguished. Detective Archer compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a sprawling dossier exceeding 400 pages, interwoven with photographs of the quiet back office, scans of pages from Gerald's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the diverted funds to their offshore destination. The report presented a coherent narrative. Subtle discrepancies in the warehouse's donation and supply records had been deliberately engineered over time to divert funds into an offshore account. When Gerald began to document these irregularities, his inquiry threatened to unveil a deep-seated network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to preserve its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, alarmed by the evidence and its implications for public trust in the local logistics network, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse with a reputation for rigorous justice. Over several marathon sessions that extended late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses proving that the discrepancies were far too systematic to be random, and the forensic accounting that traced the misappropriated funds to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with precise technical clarity, left little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Gerald Monroe. The trial unfolded over several weeks in a courtroom filled with warehouse employees, local residents, legal experts, and reporters. Federal prosecutors presented their case in a clear, methodical fashion, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated, diverted a significant sum from the facility's budget. A digital forensics expert explained how each terse command, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation advanced. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs, demonstrating that the accumulation of minute errors produced a financial gap that could only be attributed to deliberate systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a slow process that allowed corruption to seep into a system once considered the backbone of efficiency. When Detective Archer finally took the stand, her voice carried a blend of measured calm and personal sorrow. She detailed, with precise care, the moment she discovered Gerald's body in the back office, the cold, unyielding surface beneath her, the faint imprint of his shoes in a thin layer of residue, and the fragile scrap of paper that had served as his final desperate clue. Her testimony wove together every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and curt text messages, forming a portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption that left the courtroom in a contemplative silence. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments led to the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and their names were recorded as stern warnings against the abuse of institutional trust. However, Many in the community remained unsettled, feeling that a full reckoning had yet to come, as the highest-ranking conspirators managed to elude full exposure through intricate legal defenses, leaving their identities largely concealed. Following the trial, the warehouse management was forced to confront a new era of accountability, under the watchful eyes of independent auditors and an increasingly engaged public. The facility overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New protocols required real-time logging of every donation, supply order, and transaction, fortified by robust encryption and subject to periodic public audits. Although these reforms could not restore the life lost, they stood as a determined promise that no hidden discrepancy would again undermine the community's trust. Local media outlets, driven by an unyielding dedication to investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and detailed articles that chronicled every facet of the case, from the initial discovery in the back office to the painstaking digital reconstructions that unveiled a covert network of corruption. Community meetings and public forums sprang up at neighborhood centers, where residents, business leaders, and scholars engaged in robust discussions about ethical data management and the imperative of preserving public trust. The story of Gerald Monroe, a meticulous administrator whose unwavering pursuit of truth cost him his life, became a catalyst for change, galvanizing renewed efforts to ensure that every record was scrutinized and every anomaly questioned. For Detective Archer, the lessons of this investigation became a permanent part of her approach to every new case. In the quiet moments before the warehouse reopened each day, in her modest workspace, lit by a single desk lamp and accompanied by the steady hum of her computer, she reread pages from Gerald's journal and examined the reconstructed text messages with unflagging focus. Each minor detail, a fractional change in a ledger entry, a brief but stark command from a deleted message, served as a powerful reminder that persistent inquiry can unravel even the most intricate webs of deceit. As the warehouse resumed its daily operations, forklifts rumbled over smooth floors, workers meticulously arranged crates, and the hum of activity filled every corner. The legacy of the investigation transformed not only the facility's internal processes, but also the broader community's resolve to demand transparency. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as beacons of accountability, openly audited and accessible to any concerned citizen. Continuous discussions about ethical data management and the preservation of public trust became regular features at local business seminars and community colleges, ensuring that the hard-won lessons from Gerald Monroe's tragic fate would persist for years to come. This case, constructed from digital fragments, rigorous financial analyses, and the relentless determination of an investigator who refused to overlook even the slightest clue, transcended the story of a single murder. It revealed the intricate framework of modern corruption, a tapestry of hidden errors and deliberate omissions that demonstrated how even the most respected institutions could be undermined from within. The sweeping reforms that followed, the increased vigilance among employees, and the collective commitment of the community to inspect every record, stood as a lasting testament to the power of truth. And as the heavy doors of the warehouse swung open each day to reveal another cycle of operations, the memory of Gerald Monroe remained, a quiet, persistent imperative to question every inconsistency and uphold integrity at every level. A neon sign buzzed overhead as patrons moved in and out of the comic book store, a local cultural hub known for its rare issues and passionate collectors. The store's interior was a riot of color and nostalgia. Rows of vintage comics lined wooden shelves alongside glossy new releases, and posters of superheroes and underground legends adorned the walls. The energy of creative fervor permeated every corner, attracting people who cherished both the art and the stories contained within these pages. Yet later that night, what had begun as an ordinary evening of fandom would unravel into a mystery that challenged the community's sense of trust and safety. Marcus Delgado, the store's longtime maintenance supervisor, was closing up after a busy Saturday. His routine was as predictable as clockwork: check every door, switch off the lights in the back room, and secure the registers. With a practiced calm that came from years of duty, he walked the narrow corridor behind the main sales floor. Near a row of stacked back issues and promotional posters, he noticed a door left ajar, a door that led to the administrative office where all the store's sensitive records were kept. Frowning, he approached and gently pushed it open. There, amid the scattered paperwork and half-organized ledgers, lay the body of a man. The victim was dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks that now hung in disarray, his crisp attire ruined by dark stains. His face, frozen in an expression of shock and disbelief, stared unseeing at a ceiling of exposed ductwork and fluorescent lights. In his right hand, his fingers still grasped a small scrap of paper. The paper, water-damaged and torn, bore a hurried sequence of numbers and letters that might have been a clue or a final desperate message. Marcus's heart pounded as he fumbled for his radio, whispering a trembling report that set off an immediate chain of events. Within minutes, uniformed officers and forensic specialists arrived, their measured footsteps and hushed voices contrasting sharply with the chaotic scene. Investigators later identified the victim as Logan Torres, a mid-level manager who had worked at the store for several years and was known for his meticulous attention to inventory and financial records. Colleagues recalled his steady, methodical nature and his deep commitment to preserving the integrity of the store. Privately, however, Logan had become increasingly troubled by minor inconsistencies in the record books. He'd spent many late nights poring over purchase orders, donation logs, and shipment invoices, trying to reconcile differences that appeared insignificant at first, but, when aggregated over time, formed a troubling pattern. Rumors had circulated among the staff that he suspected someone within the organization was diverting funds meant for purchasing rare issues and limited edition prints. No one had expected that his quiet dedication would lead him into a confrontation from which he could not emerge. Detective Celia Brooks was assigned to the case. Celia had built her reputation on uncovering truth where others saw only routine and ability to perceive the hidden connections behind a scattered array of clues. She arrived at the store after closing time, not in haste, but with a deliberate calm. Instead of immediately cataloging the scene, she took time to absorb the surroundings, the ambient hum of the store's sound system still playing softly, the lingering smell of ink and paper, the bright, colorful displays that now seemed oddly surreal in the dim emergency lighting of the back office. At the scene, Celia knelt beside Logan Torres's body and carefully removed the scrap of paper from his stiff fingers. The hurried scribble of characters was barely legible, and she suspected that it might be a cryptic code, a final message left behind by a man desperate to expose a secret. Every detail, the angle of his collapse, the subtle prints of his shoes on the glossy floor, the way the paper curled in his grasp was meticulously noted in her notebook. Celia's gut told her that this was no random act of violence. It was a calculated move, designed to silence someone who had come too close to uncovering something significant. Instead of forcing the narrative into a strict sequence, Celia let the investigation expand gradually, like a map being revealed point by point. Her first task was to interview those who had been in the store over the past few days. At the register counter, she spoke with Talia Reyes, a cashier known for her friendly demeanor and sharp observations. Talia recalled that during a busy afternoon, she had seen Logan speaking urgently with a delivery driver near the back entrance. He looked worried, almost as if he was arguing with himself, Talia said quietly. I remember him mentioning something about figures that don't match and how the totals were off in the donation log. At the time, I thought it was just a mistake, but now I'm convinced he was onto something dangerous. Talia's account, delivered in a soft, reflective tone, added weight to the possibility that Logan's discoveries had disturbed someone with a vested interest. Next, Celia interviewed Andre Mendez, a longtime stockroom clerk who was intimately familiar with the store's inventory. Andre remembered that, a few days earlier, he had noticed Logan poring over a set of old invoices in the cramped office behind the sales floor. He was really focused, more than usual. Andre recalled, his voice low. He kept comparing digital records to the old paper ledgers. I overheard him muttering about missing amounts and altered numbers. I didn't think much of it then, but it now seems like he was following a trail that someone didn't want anyone to see. Andre's observations painted a picture of a man driven by quiet desperation, determined to uncover discrepancies that, although small individually, hinted at a larger, deliberate scheme. Haunted by these recollections, Detective Brooks obtained a warrant to search Logan Torres's modest apartment. a small unit located in a worn building near the store. The apartment was unadorned and functional. A single room with a basic bed, a cluttered desk covered in receipts and notes, and a narrow window overlooking a busy street. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and old paper, a personal archive of a man devoted to precision. In a locked drawer of an antique desk, Celia discovered Logan's personal journal, a battered leather-bound notebook filled with careful entries documenting his daily work and the mounting discrepancies he'd observed. The early pages were entirely routine. Logs of shift times, notes on delivery schedules, and brief observations about the inventory. But as the entries progressed, his writing grew increasingly anxious. In one entry from 3 days before his death, he wrote, "There are persistent discrepancies in the donation records, small amounts missing from each transaction, that when totaled become significant. I fear someone with insider access is systematically diverting funds for their own gain. I must tread carefully, for if I continue, I risk exposing a secret that powerful people would kill to protect." The final sentence ended abruptly, as though his pen had been abruptly seized, leaving behind a chilling gap. Concurrently, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Logan's aging cell phone, a device that bore the wear of many late nights and anxious conversations. The recovered messages were terse and unadorned. One simply read, "Stop now," while another warned, "Don't ask questions." Their blunt, matter-of-fact tone confirmed what Celia had long feared. Someone had been issuing clear directives to deter Logan from pursuing his investigation, and those warnings had been fatally disregarded. Rather than arranging the evidence into a linear chronology, Detective Brooks allowed her investigation to branch out naturally, assembling a mosaic of clues from various sources. With the cooperation of the store's management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in the back office, a cramped space filled with stacks of handwritten ledgers, digital logs on aging computers, and rows of filing cabinets that chronicled the store's financial transactions over many years. Working closely with veteran records clerk Darius Lee, whose decades of experience made him an almost living archive of the store's operations, Celia meticulously compared the digital entries with the original paper records. The differences were minute, a digit altered here, a date shifted there, but when these minor discrepancies were tallied over several months, they revealed a pattern that was too systematic to be accidental. The digital logs invariably reported that every shipment and donation was complete, while the handwritten records consistently documented slight shortfalls, small amounts missing from each entry that, when aggregated, amounted to a significant diversion of funds and rare merchandise. Forensic accountants were brought in to analyze the financial data. Their rigorous analysis produced detailed charts and graphs that mapped the cumulative impact of these discrepancies. The numbers were damning. These minor shortfalls, nearly invisible on any individual day, had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been secretly funneled through a labyrinth of electronic transactions to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Each fractional variance contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based systems for their own enrichment. As layers of evidence continued to build, Detective Brooks began receiving anonymous tips. A plain envelope discovered behind a row of filing cabinets contained a typed note that simply read, "Every figure holds a secret." Another tip arrived via a secure email from an untraceable source, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages provided few concrete details, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those behind the cover-up were monitoring her every move and were prepared to take drastic measures if their secret was threatened. Federal agents, alerted to the potential magnitude of the corruption, soon joined the investigation with state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Logan's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown increasingly insistent in the final days before his death. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the store's operating budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had siphoned off resources for years. And when Logan's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was brutally cut short. Detective Brooks compiled all her findings into a comprehensive report, a sprawling dossier of over 400 pages interwoven with photographs of the deserted back office, scans of pages from Logan's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds to their offshore destination. The report presented a coherent narrative. Subtle discrepancies in the store's donation and inventory records had been deliberately engineered over time to divert funds into an offshore account. When Logan began to document these irregularities, his inquiry threatened to reveal a deep-seated network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to preserve its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, deeply troubled by the implications of the evidence for public trust in local businesses, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse renowned for its rigorous approach to justice. Over a series of lengthy sessions that stretched late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic methods used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that demonstrated the improbability of the discrepancies being accidental, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with precise technical language, left little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, charges that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Vincent Reed. The trial unfolded over several weeks in a bustling courtroom filled with store employees, local residents, legal scholars, and a steady stream of reporters. Federal prosecutors presented their case in clear, methodical terms, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant sum from the store's budget. A digital forensics expert took the stand and meticulously explained how each curt directive, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation advanced. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs that demonstrated how the accumulation of minor errors resulted in a financial gap that could only be the product of deliberate, systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a slow process that allowed corruption to seep into a system once held in high regard. When Detective Brooks took the stand, her tone was measured yet imbued with personal sorrow. She recounted, with painstaking clarity, the moment she discovered Logan's body in the abandoned records room, the cold, smooth floor beneath her feet, the faint imprint of his shoes in a delicate layer of dust, and the fragile scrap of paper that had served as his final desperate clue. Her narrative wove together every fragment of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal pages and stark text messages, forming an unassailable portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption. Every detail was delivered with careful precision, leaving the courtroom in a reflective hush as the full magnitude of the betrayal was laid bare. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in public records as stern reminders of the consequences of abusing institutional trust. Yet many in the community believed that full accountability remained out of reach. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects behind the diversion, managed to evade full exposure through intricate legal defenses, and their identities remained largely hidden in the final verdicts. That unresolved uncertainty cast a heavy, lingering shadow over the case, a reminder that even when corruption is exposed, some secrets persist behind closed doors. In the wake of the trial, the comic book store's management was forced to embark on sweeping reforms. Under the scrutinizing gaze of independent auditors and amid heightened public awareness, the establishment completely overhauled its digital inventory systems. New protocols were implemented that required real-time logging of every sale, donation, and restocking order, supported by robust encryption and regular public audits. Although these reforms could not restore the life lost, they served as a clear pledge to transparency, a promise that no hidden discrepancy would again undermine the community's trust in its cultural institutions. Local media outlets, driven by a passion for investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and in-depth articles that chronicled every facet of the case, from the shocking discovery in the back office to the painstaking digital reconstructions that exposed a covert network of corruption. Public forums and town hall meetings emerged in community centers, where residents, collectors, and cultural advocates engaged in spirited debates about the ethical responsibilities of digital record keeping and the preservation of artistic heritage. The story of Logan Torres, a dedicated manager whose relentless pursuit of truth cost him his life, became a potent symbol of accountability, inspiring renewed vigilance among community members to scrutinize every record and confront every hidden irregularity. For Detective Brooks, each new investigation was approached with the lessons from this case deeply embedded in her memory. In the quiet moments before the comic book store reopened each day, in her modest office illuminated by a single desk lamp and the steady hum of her computer, she often revisited the pages of Logan's journal and re-examined the reconstructed text messages with unwavering focus. Every minute detail, a marginal difference in a ledger entry, a curt command from a deleted message, reminded her that persistent inquiry is indispensable and that every hidden inconsistency holds the potential to unravel extensive networks of deceit. As the store gradually resumed its daily operations, with collectors returning to browse rare issues, new fans discovering forgotten classics, and the soft murmur of discussions about art and history filling the space, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the store's internal processes, but also the broader community's commitment to transparency. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as exemplars of accountability, rigorously audited by independent experts and accessible to any concerned citizen. Ongoing conversations about ethical data management and the preservation of cultural integrity became a regular feature at local universities and creative workshops, ensuring that the lessons learned from Logan Torres's tragic fate would inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, pieced together from digital fragments, detailed financial analyses, and the steadfast determination of an investigator who refused to overlook even the smallest clue, transcended the simple narrative of a single murder. It revealed a labyrinth of modern corruption, a mosaic of hidden errors and deliberate omissions that exposed how even the most cherished institutions can be undermined from within. The sweeping reforms that followed, the increased awareness among staff, and the community's collective resolve to examine every record became a lasting reminder that truth is found in the careful scrutiny of every detail. As the doors of the comic book store opened each day to welcome a new wave of enthusiasts eager to explore forgotten stories and fresh perspectives, the memory of Logan Torres endured, a persistent call to challenge every irregularity and to maintain accountability as the cornerstone of cultural preservation. A midnight silence blanketed the campus, its once lively corridors now echoing with the footsteps of late-night wanderers and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. In a building dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, where lecture halls and research labs bore the weight of decades of scholarship, an event was unfolding that would soon shatter the campus's fragile trust and expose secrets that many had hoped would remain hidden. In the sprawling academic complex of Westbridge University, where modern glass panels intermingled with venerable brick structures, the library was considered the soul of the institution. Its long corridors, lined with shelves of meticulously arranged books and dimly lit study areas, had witnessed generations of students questing after truth and wisdom. Late one evening, when the library had emptied of its usual chatter, and the only sound was that of a lone janitor's steady footsteps, a discovery in one of the rarely visited archives set off a chain of events that would send shockwaves throughout the community. Elias Monroe, a dedicated caretaker who had worked at the library for nearly 30 years, made his routine rounds after closing time. His method was as predictable as the ticking of an ancient clock. He inspected every door, every window, and every quiet corner where the dust of neglect had gathered. As he passed a narrow stairwell leading to the deep archive, Elias noticed something out of place. A door that should have been locked was ajar. With a furrowed brow, he pushed the door open and found himself in a cramped storage area. Amid stacks of faded documents, disassembled filing cabinets, and yellowed newspapers from bygone eras, he saw a form on the floor that made his heart stutter. There, lying prone on the cold concrete, was the body of a man. The victim, dressed in a pressed white shirt and dark trousers, now lay contorted in an unnatural posture. His face was contorted in a final, silent scream, and his eyes were fixed in an expression of shock that no one should ever see. In his right hand he clutched a small scrap of paper, its ink blurred by the moisture in the air. Elias's hands trembled as he slowly backed away, fumbling for his radio. "There's a body in the archives," he whispered, his voice quavering in the dim light. Within minutes, the quiet solitude of the library was interrupted by the measured footsteps of uniformed officers and forensic experts, their presence a stark reminder that nothing could hide in the shadows forever. Investigators later identified the victim as Dr. Malcolm Pierce, a mid-level research coordinator who had been responsible for managing the university's extensive historical and academic archives. Colleagues remembered Malcolm as a man of precise habits and quiet determination, someone who had spent countless hours cross-referencing records and ensuring that every piece of historical data was accurate. Recently, however, whispers had spread through the administrative halls that Malcolm had grown unusually fixated on discrepancies in the archival logs, small errors that seemed trivial individually, but, when viewed collectively, hinted at something far more sinister. Few had noticed the change in his demeanor, but those close to him recalled his late nights, his furrowed brow as he scrutinized columns of numbers in outdated ledgers, and the secretive phone calls that he made in hushed tones. Detective Lydia White was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator known for her unconventional approach and her ability to find meaning in the minutiae. Arriving at the library without fanfare, she took her time moving through the quiet corridors and hushed stacks, carefully noting every detail of the scene. In the cramped archive room, under the harsh glare of a single overhead light, Lydia knelt beside Malcolm's body. With gloved hands, she gently pried the scrap of paper from his stiff fingers. The paper was small and unassuming, its message reduced to a scrambled sequence of digits and letters that might have been a desperate final clue or a coded warning. Lydia transferred the faded characters onto a notepad with deliberate care, aware that in cases like this, even the smallest detail could unlock an entire conspiracy. Rather than immediately imposing a linear timeline on the investigation, Detective White allowed her inquiry to branch out organically. Her first step was to speak with those who had been present at the university in the days leading up to the tragedy. In one of the quiet study lounges of the library, she encountered Jasmine Ortiz, an administrative assistant with an acute sense of observation. Jasmine recalled that during the previous week, Malcolm had been unusually reticent and preoccupied. He kept saying that something wasn't right with the archive records. Jasmine explained, voice barely above a whisper. He was comparing the digital logs with old paper records, and he mentioned that small amounts were missing every time. I thought he was just being overly meticulous, but now I believe he was onto something that could have cost him his life. Jasmine's words, tinged with regret, suggested that Malcolm's careful scrutiny had uncovered a hidden discrepancy, one that threatened to upend the integrity of the archival system. Next, Lydia sought out Calvin Reed, a janitor who had been on duty in the library during the critical hours. Calvin remembered passing by Malcolm's office on several occasions in recent days. "I saw him poring over papers and looking really stressed," Calvin said softly. He'd stop in the corridor, check his phone, and then rush back into that records room as if he were trying to hide something. He mentioned something about lost figures and that the numbers weren't adding up. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it looks like he might have been onto something dangerous. Calvin's recollections added urgency to the investigation, reinforcing the notion that Malcolm's discoveries had stirred trouble within the university's hidden corridors. Compelled by these accounts, Detective White obtained a warrant to search Malcolm's modest apartment, a small unit located in a modest building not far from the campus. The apartment was unembellished, a single room with functional furnishings, a simple bed pushed against a bare wall, a cluttered desk littered with papers and personal mementos, and a window that overlooked the busy street below. The air was heavy with the odor of stale coffee and old paper, a quiet reflection of a life dedicated to precision and scholarly inquiry. In a locked drawer of an antique writing desk, Lydia discovered Malcolm's personal journal, a worn leather-bound notebook filled with detailed entries documenting his work, his observations on the inconsistencies he had found, and his growing sense of foreboding. The early entries were purely routine, but in one entry written just 3 days before his death, Malcolm confessed, "I have uncovered recurring discrepancies in the archival logs, small amounts missing from every shipment of records, errors that seem deliberate. I fear that someone with access to these systems is redirecting funds and data for their own gain. If I dig too deep, I might expose a secret that those in power will kill to keep hidden." The entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-thought, leaving behind a silence that resonated with impending danger. Simultaneously, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Malcolm's aging cell phone, a device that had seen countless late nights and critical moments. The recovered messages were stark and unembellished. One simply stated, "Stop now," while another warned, "Don't ask questions." Their direct tone left no room for misinterpretation. These were clear warnings issued by an unknown party, a final caution that had gone unheeded. Rather than imposing a neat linear sequence on the burgeoning investigation, Detective White allowed herself to explore the case in overlapping layers. With the cooperation of the university's administration, she turned her attention to the archival records stored in the deep recesses of the library's secured repository, a quiet space filled with rows of ancient ledgers, digital logs displayed on aging computer terminals, and filing cabinets that groaned under the weight of decades of records. Working closely with Desmond Lee, a veteran archivist whose decades of service had made him a living repository of institutional memory, Lydia meticulously compared the digital entries with the original handwritten records. The differences were subtle, a single digit altered, a date slightly modified, but when aggregated over a span of several months they revealed a pattern too systematic to be a mere oversight. The digital logs consistently recorded every record as complete, while the handwritten logs persistently noted small recurring shortfalls, tiny omissions that, when summed, amounted to a significant diversion of funds and data. Forensic accountants were brought in to scrutinize the financial ramifications of these discrepancies. Their rigorous analysis produced intricate charts and graphs that mapped the cumulative impact of the errors. The figures were irrefutable. What might have been dismissed as trivial inconsistencies on a day-to-day basis had, over time, resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been covertly channeled through a labyrinth of electronic transfers to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Every fractional variance, every minor error, contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based systems for their own enrichment. As layers of evidence continued to mount, anonymous tips began arriving. A plain envelope, discovered tucked away behind a row of dusty file cabinets in the archive, contained a typed note that read, "Every figure hides a secret." Another tip, delivered via a secure email from an untraceable source, instructed, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages were brief and offered little in the way of specifics, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those behind the cover-up were watching her every move and would act decisively if their secret were exposed. Federal agents, alerted by the mounting evidence and the potential scope of the corruption, joined the investigation with state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Malcolm's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown more frequent and insistent in the final days before his murder. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed sophisticated models detailing how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the university's budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a carefully orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Malcolm's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was brutally cut short. Detective White compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a sprawling dossier of over 400 pages that interwove photographs of the abandoned archives, scans of pages from Malcolm's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and comprehensive financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds to their offshore destination. The report presented a coherent narrative. Subtle discrepancies in the archival records had been deliberately engineered over time to divert funds into an offshore account. When Malcolm began to document these irregularities, his inquiry exposed a deep-rooted network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to protect its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, troubled by the implications for the integrity of academic research and public trust in the university, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse known for its rigorous standards. Over a series of extended sessions that stretched late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques that recovered the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that demonstrated the improbability of the discrepancies being mere mistakes, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with meticulous precision, left little room for doubt. After thorough deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, charges that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Malcolm Pierce. The trial itself spanned several weeks in a packed courtroom filled with university staff, local residents, legal scholars, and an unrelenting press. Federal prosecutors presented their case in clear, measured terms, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant sum from the university's resources. A digital forensics expert took the stand, painstakingly explaining how each curt directive, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation advanced. Forensic accountants unveiled elaborate graphs that demonstrated how the cumulative effect of seemingly trivial errors resulted in a financial gap that could only be explained by deliberate systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses recounted how the integrity of the archival records had gradually eroded, a slow, almost imperceptible process that allowed corruption to flourish within a system once held in the highest regard. When Detective White took the stand, her voice was calm yet imbued with the weight of personal loss. She described, with careful clarity, the moment she had discovered Malcolm's body in the deserted archive room, the unyielding hardness of the floor beneath her, the faint traces of his footprints etched into a layer of dust, and the delicate scrap of paper that had served as his final desperate clue. Her testimony wove together every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and stark text messages, forming an unassailable portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption. Each observation was delivered with deliberate care, and the courtroom was enveloped in a reflective silence as the full magnitude of the betrayal was laid bare. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in public records as a solemn warning against the abuse of institutional trust. Yet many in the community remained unsettled by the fact that the highest-ranking conspirators, the masterminds behind the diversion, had managed to shield themselves through complex legal defenses, their identities remaining largely obscured. This lingering ambiguity cast a heavy pall over the proceedings, a reminder that even when corruption is exposed, some secrets remain in the shadowy recesses of power. In the aftermath of the trial, university leadership was forced to embrace sweeping reforms. Under the vigilant oversight of independent auditors and a determined public, the institution overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New protocols mandated real-time logging of every archival entry and donation, fortified by robust encryption and subjected to regular public audits. Although these changes could not bring back Malcolm Pierce, they stood as an enduring commitment to transparency, a promise that no hidden discrepancy would again compromise the integrity of academic research and historical preservation. Local media outlets, driven by a deep-seated commitment to investigative reporting, produced a series of documentaries and in-depth articles that meticulously chronicled every facet of the case, from the fateful discovery in the quiet archive room to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a covert network of corruption. Community forums and town hall meetings were organized in neighborhood centers, where residents, faculty, and civic leaders engaged in animated discussions about the ethical responsibilities of data management and the importance of preserving public trust in educational institutions. The story of Malcolm Pierce, a scholar who had dedicated his life to safeguarding history, became a symbol of accountability, galvanizing renewed efforts among community members to scrutinize every record and challenge every hidden anomaly. For Detective White, every subsequent investigation was approached with the hard-earned lessons of this case firmly in mind. During the quiet hours when the campus was hushed and the archives lay undisturbed, she would revisit the recovered pages of Malcolm's journal and carefully re-examine the reconstructed text messages, each minute detail reinforcing her belief that only relentless inquiry could unmask the full extent of corruption. Every slight alteration in a ledger, and every curt warning from a deleted message served as a testament to the power of persistence. As the university resumed its daily rhythms, students pouring into lecture halls, professors engaging in vigorous debate, and researchers delving into new discoveries, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only internal administrative practices, but also the community's broader commitment to transparency and accountability. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to manipulation, now stood as pillars of integrity, rigorously audited by independent experts and open to any concerned citizen. Ongoing dialogues about ethical data management and the safeguarding of institutional trust became a regular part of academic symposia and public policy discussions, ensuring that the lessons from Malcolm Pierce's tragic fate would continue to inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, pieced together from digital fragments, painstaking financial analyses, and the unwavering determination of a detective who refused to overlook even the minutest detail, transcended the simple narrative of a single murder. It revealed an intricate web of modern corruption, a tapestry of hidden errors and deliberate omissions that exposed how even the most esteemed institutions could be undermined from within. The sweeping reforms that followed, the increased vigilance among staff, and the collective resolve of the community to question every record became a lasting reminder that truth is often found in the smallest details. As campus lights flickered on each morning and the halls of the university filled with renewed purpose, the memory of Malcolm Pierce endured, a quiet, enduring call to scrutinize every inconsistency and to hold steadfast to the principles of accountability and integrity.